Or pugs. So, today, we're going to learn some stuff. Are you ready to learn? Have you got your thinking caps on? I know I don't. I don't learn anything. I have a cat that is persistently annoying me today. Won't leave me alone. Just wants pets. It's a brat cat. It's a war crime cat, but it's a brat cat. But Alternate History Hub is going to be teaching us about the most underrated era in history, in his opinion. So, I am of the opinion that I love history. I also love learning about things I didn't know. So, what we're going to do is we're going to jump into this. And we're going to pay some attention. And there's a cat that you keep on distracting me, Gato. Come here. Come here. Why are you distracting me so much today? Can you tell me? Huh? Can you tell them? Huh? What is it? You got a cord in your face, don't you? Alright, fine, come here. You don't want a hug? No? Tell me what you want. Tell me what you want. You just want to chill up here? Alright, fine. You act like this every time the camera's on. You want to get up here, then you don't want to be in the camera shot. Okay, I get it. Alright. Sorry, guys. Get down. Get down. Go on. Come on. Go on. There you go. Let's get into it.
Hi. Every guy has their favorite era of history.
True.
Like, you got your World War II buffs, the Civil War enthusiasts. Maybe you love the medieval era, or Shogun Japan. And we all know how often men think about ancient Rome. If you're an American, then there's a general idea for how Western history is kind of gone.
Right.
Let me know if this sounds familiar. First, just start off with ancient Egypt, or Greece, then Rome.
Yep.
Move on to the fall of Rome.
Yep.
Then the Dark Ages.
Yep.
Maybe some Vikings. Next are medieval times, then the Renaissance, and then on to Columbus, then the Pilgrims, all culminating with the founders and the start of real history, which is, of course, the United States.
Yes. Because it didn't start until we did. Some people are stupid.
The main characters of the world, baby. You could say there's a little historical blind spot. But that's kind of the general way world history is sort of viewed.
True.
Whatever the era happens to be, there's some general idea or stereotype about what that period was all about. But I'm here today to tell you about a time period that nobody ever thinks about. It's this one. The period between the 1500s and early 1700s is, in my opinion, the most underrated era in Western history.
I can agree with this.
Especially in the United States. Now, my claims have no actual statistical basis. I'm not gonna cite a source on this.
Okay.
It's just kind of a vibe I get.
All
It's
right.
my channel. I get to say what I want.
Go for it. Do your thing, bud.
From my obtuse and very scientific observations, there's only like 3 things your average American might vaguely know of this era. 1, the Renaissance. This is
Maybe.
the Renaissance.
Maybe.
But that's kind of a limited term. You know, that term makes you think of art and culture and the masters. Really just anything with Italy. The second, in the English-speaking world, is usually like Shakespeare. Shakespeare
True.
in the Elizabethan era was like late 1500s, early 1600s. And in public education, you only hear about Shakespeare in high school English.
Which is kind of ridiculous because the thing about it is they want you to read the classics, but they don't ever focus on why the classics are so important. They don't ever really do that.
Imagine future people only knowing about today because of the pop culture of our time.
Please, for the love of God, no. Please. I just don't ever want the shame.
There is one major thing Americans know about this era. One that is just kind of drilled into you at a young age. And you know what it is. Pilgrims. F***ing pilgrims.
Yep.
And Thanksgiving and Pocahontas. Anything after Columbus and before the Revolution can really just be lumped together into this vague category of pilgrims. What's kind of funny is that in public education, at least, the 1500s to early 1700s is kind of in this weird limbo. Like, you just stop learning about anything that goes on in Europe once the pilgrims actually come over here.
I think it would do everyone a fantastic favor if this period of time, is not so much 1500 to 1700, But I'd say 1400 to 1700 should be a whole course in and of itself, because so much stuff happened in this period of time that, like, this is when the age of exploration started. This is also when, well, a lot of terrible things happened, but at the same time, the modern world is the way it is today because of the actions taken from 1400 to 1700. It more so than, like, most other periods, that 300 years defined the world we lived in today.
Literally anything else across the pond is just never mentioned until the French Revolution.
True.
But back in Europe, like, things were still happening. A lot was happening. The term for this period is the early modern period. It's not the most attractive name,
no,
but it's pretty accurate to what it was. This was a transition period, when the medieval world changed into one that created the conditions for what we would call modern Europe. Wars lasted 30 years, fashion looked like this, borders looked like that, and
don't even get me started on the HRE. Oh, God.
The medieval world clashed and adapted to new technologies that were never seen before. Gunpowder, cannons, muskets. That's a whole lot of words just to say, I like the knights with guns. This era was dominated by what is now called pike and shot warfare. You know ancient Greece? You know how they used the phalanx? That was the unstoppable tactic of its day, before the Romans put a swift end to all of that.
Poor predictable
Freaks.
always takes
Phalanx.
good old
Phalanx.
nothing beats that.
Afterwards, using big spears was kind of out of fashion through the Empire era to medieval times, all until the Swiss began to form up in a square with pikes. Technically, the Scottish thought of it first, but that didn't really end up well
The Scottish started it, but they industrialized it, okay?
for them. The pike square was a solution to a problem, and that problem was the horse. Throughout the medieval era, cavalry had been dominant on the battlefield, with infantry lacking any real means to defend against it. That was, until the pike square. Bunch of soldiers, very little training, take a big ol' stick and put it out in front. Spain's empire, in part, was built from dominating with the pike and shot, as they introduced the shot. Musketeers on the flanks of the square that could give the formation some ranged attack, and also would retreat inside the square when need be. And I absolutely love the muskets at this specific time. At first they weren't even
Utterly ridiculous.
technically muskets. The early muskets required a stick to aim and a wick to fire, as it was too unwieldy to prepare and aim with two hands. This was gunpowder warfare in its absolute infancy.
Also, I don't know if you've ever heard a musket fire off, but quite literally the sound is deafening. It is think about it like this. A musket sounded, the first time I ever heard a musket, it was the sound I expected to hear out of a cannon. Okay? That's the level of volume we're talking about here. It is no joke.
A technology so young that it was seen as black magic by its contemporaries. Didn't really help their case that they had their own guilds and protected their secrets. So yeah, they did kind of look suspicious. This period's so neat to me because while guns do still exist, tactics are still with swords and spears. Cavalry, for some reason, decided to adopt guns too. So for a brief while, cavalry no longer did the whole charge thing. It would just circle outside the pike square and shoot occasionally with pistols and blunderbusses, which is just kind of hilarious.
Yeah, it's
This is like
stupid.
if you just clashed together a bunch of unrelated tactics and technologies. Pike formations like the Greek phalanx, guns that were crafted by hand and treated
Look at that dude's pants. What the hell?
as specialists, and cavalry that shot using pistols in full armor. Technically not knights, but it's close enough.
Yeah.
And this is why Warhammer Fantasy has a superior aesthetic to 40k.
No, it
That's
doesn't.
Right,
No, it doesn't. You are wrong. You are wrong, and you will die on that hill. You are wrong about that. I don't have to give a reason. You're just wrong.
said it. Even if you have never seen these facts,
Okay, seriously, riding polar bears in the battle is a baller move. I'm just saying, but you're still wrong.
you probably know what they're all about. The Empire might as well have Holy Romans slapped in front of
True.
it, because that's what it is. Kislev is basically just Eastern Europe,
Yes.
winged hussars and all, and don't get me started on the vampire counts. Ironically, there is a faction I could accurately describe as true medieval, with knights and lances, and the
Don't talk about the French. Do not talk about the Frenchmen. Do not talk about Britannia.
absolute absence of gunpowder, and that's Bretonnia. Bretonnia f***ing sucks.
Yes, it
For me
does.
personally, I've kind of lost interest in the standard medieval era. Maybe I've just been overexposed to it, but I don't know, lately I've just been drawn to this more. At the end of the day, you know, I like both, but one side has really goofy hats, and I like goofy hats.
Okay, seriously, you're discounting Warhammer 40k's stupid hats? They have Spire Nobles. Spire Nobles have more money than God. And they don't know what to do with it, so they buy stupid hats. You have not been looking at the right art, my friend.
Now I think about it, you know, it's kind of, tasteless to say that certain wars were neat and cool, considering a lot of people died. But I don't know, what's the rule on that? After a few centuries, I think you can say that, right?
Just go with the China rule here. If you can find any war in medieval Europe that caused as many casualties as any war, period, in China, then you have to say that war is no longer cool. Just saying.
It's fascinating, at least. Fascinating because pike and shot was just this anomaly in warfare. It can't really be compared to anything else. The states we're familiar with in many parts did exist, assuming you weren't in the Balkans, I guess. And what's cool about that is a lot of countries that aren't the strongest today were at some point in this era an absolute powerhouse.
Sweden.
Like Poland-Lithuania.
Yes.
Look at that. Poland-Lithuania dominated the East. The winged hussars were the military force on the battlefield,
Yes.
even while cavalry in the west was losing significance. Ironically, Poland was the terror to Russia, which was coming out of its own time of troubles. And for a century
When is it not coming out of a time of troubles? Is just my question to you.
there, another major power in the east was Sweden. Despite their lower population, Sweden had turned the Baltic Sea into a Baltic lake, all thanks to the tactical genius of warrior kings like Charles XII and Gustavus Adolphus. It took a coalition of Poland, Russia, and Austria to bring them down. Funnily enough, Charles would hide out in Ottoman territory once the war turned against him. Oh yeah, the Ottomans. This era was the golden age for the Ottomans. In a
Yes.
way, they brought on its beginning with the fall of Constantinople, and their decline didn't really begin until the late 1600s after the Battle of Vienna.
If you want to know what happened at the Battle of Vienna, I recommend Sabaton, the Winged Hussars.
Though that's debatable. In a time when the Spanish were colonizing the world and France was solidifying its kingdom, the
Everyone forgets about Portugal.
Balkans just remained under Ottoman control, unable to gain independence until the 19th century. And it makes sense why. I mean, look at that.
Yeah.
In the 17th century, the Ottomans controlled land from Vienna to the Persian Gulf, and from Mecca to Tunisia.
Yep.
Almost half of the Mediterranean and pretty much the entire Black Sea were either tributaries or directly in their control.
Yep.
It really is insane that there was even a Battle of Vienna to begin with, when you just remember where Vienna was on a map. Even crazier that it was the second time. The Austrian-Habsburg rivalry with the Ottomans was really something. Like, in the span of 250 years, they fought like 14 wars, which in hindsight is actually quite ironic considering how the two would fight side by side with one another in their very last war. It's kind of poetic. Speaking of potentially the last war,
it was one of the first times Britain and France fought side by side, and it was the first time that the Ottoman Empire, and yeah, it was a thing, guys. World War I was a thing for more reasons than I can count.
Ukraine. What we think of as Ukraine during this time was controlled by, well, nobody. Well, technically Poland, but it was just on a map. This was an actual no man's land in Europe. The collapse of the Golden Horde centuries before created a power vacuum. The flat plains were roamed by Crimean Tatars, who frequently raided Slavic lands to enslave and plunder. This only got worse with aid from the Ottomans, considering the Ottomans were buying those slaves.
Yes.
This land was simply called the Wild Fields for a time, a vast plain.
If you were in modern day, if you were in modern day Ukraine, you literally got shit on by legitimately everybody, and I mean everybody shit on you. It was a continuous thing, just line after line. The second one country got done shitting on you and you washed it off, another country showed up and started shitting on you.
Plain of grasslands ruled by nobody, settled by nobody, where the only people that would venture
after how many genocides
into this land were tough settlers, nomads, or criminals who wished to get away from jurisdiction. Sound familiar? This is where we got the Cossacks. I just find it fascinating that a part of Europe was unsettled for so long that a lot of the settlements there are just as young as cities in the United States.
Yep.
Hey, speaking of dysfunctional states, the Holy Roman Empire. The HRE gets made fun of a lot. And yeah, I get it. It was a mess.
Yeah.
It was an absolute mess. But those flaws are why I love it. Like how people love the deformed squish face of a pug.
Don't start. War pugs, don't you listen to him. Don't you listen to this incorrect man. Your faces are not deformed.
All of this was just divided into assorted lands between minor lords, major lords, independent cities, grand duchies. It was horrible, but it somehow lasted 1,000 years. Germany.
What to say about the HRE? Nothing good. The HRE, there were places like Austria that held such a broad amount of land in there, and then there were places that were literally just the size of buildings, and yeah, it got dumb.
Germany in general was just the worst place to be during this time.
Yes.
We had the 30 Years' War, Protestant Reformation, general famine.
Yes.
Soldiers committed vast war crimes dressed like this. It was a wild time. Charles V is kind of the embodiment of this entire era.
Look at that Habsburg chin, okay? If you don't know where you get a Habsburg chin from, if you want a jawline like this guy, you need to be inbred 7 ways from Sunday.
He was the sovereign over territory that we can't even
I need to stop
fathom today
interrupting this.
being a part of the same region or government.
True.
And for the most part, the largest wars were fought with paid mercenaries. The very concept of a professional soldier was kind of strange. Mercenaries had always existed, but they were on the sidelines. But now, an average man could be paid to be a soldier as a career without being a lord or owning any land.
Yep.
And that had ethical questions. Like, at least in the US, being a soldier is seen as a whole thing. But in times like the 30 Years' War, a soldier was someone paid by your local lord just to protect his interests. Even if those interests were aligned with yours religiously, like being a Catholic, the fighters themselves were still distrusted and not really liked. This is probably because if the lord didn't pay them, they'd rampage through the countryside. This was a transition period.
Happened.
There were still kinks to figure out. Too bad the Holy Roman Empire never figured out those problems. So yeah, in this era, we saw the Swedes, the Poles, the Spanish, and the Turks all at their height. And really the ones who would come to dominate the coming centuries were still getting things figured out. Hell, England executed their king and didn't have one for a decade. There is so much I can't even get into. Like, this whole era was during what was called the Little Ice Age.
Yes.
So temperatures were colder than usual, and winters were harsher. Many theorize that that was what drove this period to have such conflict. Historian Hugh Trevor Roper even deemed a portion of this the General Crisis because of how many revolts and wars were ongoing in Western Europe.
Oh yeah.
Everything I just said throughout this whole video can be dissected a million ways. So consider anything I said just riddled with asterisks. Like the 30 Years' War. Sure, it was a conflict driven by religion, but it was primarily politics and noble squabbles. The Ottomans were a constant threat to the Habsburgs, but so were the French.
Yes.
And the French sometimes even allied with the Ottomans to get at Austria. This was an exception to the rule, though. Everyone hated the French for doing this. The entire point of this video is that I think this era is incredibly underappreciated. And while it's crude to mainly point at the warfare and say, hey, isn't that neat? I know my audience. I know what got you guys into history. Vibes and aesthetics aren't the smartest way to get people interested, but it gets people interested.
It does.
And at least from an American perspective, it's hilarious. Because while all of this was going on in Europe, for us it was really just this. Or this. Oh, damn, I completely forgot to talk about pirates.
Yeah, piracy, let's
if
go.
If you're interested in learning more, I've got some sources and channels I think you should check out. San Roman History is my favorite channel of this era. He has videos that talk about how Spain's military came to be so dominant, how gunpowder transformed the battlefield. He goes into depth on the 30 Years' War and is probably to blame for why I became so obsessed. Iron and Blood is a pretty good non-fiction history on Germany and the HRE in this time period. It's about the rise of Prussia, but it gives a pretty good insight into how the 30 Years' War was fought. And
Prussia was really... Everybody talks about Prussian military prowess. And it's not a joke. During that time period, they were literally Sparta of that period in history. Insane. In fact, during the French Revolution, when Napoleon fought the Prussians, it was a big deal because he killed so many. It was a thing.
And how warfare in general was thought of during this time. Especially how the average soldier was perceived by a war-weary civilian. And hell, check out Warhammer Fantasy more. It's been pretty overshadowed by 40k.
Yes.
If you want a quick and fun rundown on the whole lore, check out the channel Pancreas No Work. He loves elves and he hates Bretonia, and his stuff is pretty good.
I know, I worked with him before. We did something on the Avatar Arcane.
I don't really know why I made this video. I just thought it'd be fun. I guess it was really just an excuse to say, I want to shoot a blunderbuss, like at least one time in my life. I want to shoot a blunderbuss.
Yes.
I just keep getting these annoying personalized ads. How do they even know that much about me?
Oh.
Well, you see, Jimmy, your privacy is being violated.
Oh!
Yeah, I know. You're in my house. How'd you get in my house?
No, Jimmy. Thousands of companies are collecting, aggregating, and trading your personal data without you knowing anything about it.
Oh, no!
So what do I do about it?
You should use this video's sponsor, Incogni. Incogni helps you protect your privacy and take your personal data off the market by reaching out to data brokers on your behalf, requesting your personal data removal, and dealing with their objections. You see, I've been getting random spam calls for months, but once I signed up with Incogni, those calls have practically gone away. Not to mention, I can now search in peace with the peace of mind that my data is going to be well hidden.
Yay!
This is something I would have had to do manually before, tracking everything down on the internet. But now with Incogni, they do it for me.
Hey!
Wow, that's actually quite the time saver.
And how? Go to incogni.com/althist and use the code althist to get an exclusive offer of 60% off.
So if I get Incogni, does that mean you'll stop using my data to pop by my house? You're kind of like
No.
spam yourself, you know.
Well, Jimmy, that's kind of mean. Like, really hurtful, man. Thought we were friends. That's incogni.com/althist.
Guys, if you want Incogni, description down below. I'll have that down there for you. This is a relatively recent release by oh my god, I can't even talk. Alternate History Hub. Alternate History Hub. It's a you guys know what I'm trying to say. Don't beat me over the head with it. Guys, this period in history is so baller, it's ridiculous. From the Ottomans shutting Europe out of the spice trade all the way up until really the collapse of several major empires. You can't get much better than that, okay? You can't. You really, really can't. Guys, you got so many just baller stories from that time. You had world powers rising and falling like nobody's business. You had the Swedes of all people, going back to their Viking roots while dressed fancy and with guns, who quite literally dominated a lot of areas in Europe until they just didn't anymore. God, what else? So many different areas, and the rise and fall of entire regimes, and the Habsburgs, who literally married everybody and then started marrying each other to the point where the concept of being a Habsburg was everybody knew that you were banging your cousin or your sister. One of the two. That's just how it went. That is how it went. Guys, thank you for spending some time with the old man. Warpugs, check the description down below for all of Alternate History Hub's links, including my own, down there below, including Patreon, everything like that. I recently taught Valk how to play, well, not really taught, we're just playing through it together. We're just having some fun playing Dawn of War together. It's her first time playing it through. It is my second time, but I haven't really played it in a long time. So it's kind of fun for me. She's controlling a couple of characters. I'm controlling a couple of characters. We're playing a co-op campaign. So just, yeah. If you're on Patreon, that'll be uploaded soon. And if it's not already uploaded, I'm going to shut up now. And Warhammer 40k is better than fantasy. Sorry to tell you.